Welcome. I'm glad y'all are here. We just want to talk about trauma healing and a little bit about our program today. So I'd like to talk about first kind of the program in general. This program was started in Africa during about 2000, when there was a lot of conflict and pastors were finding that the people in their churches were not being transformed in the way that God wants them to be through the preaching and through their involvement with the church. And so they approached SIL missionaries to say, what can we do? How can we help the people that have experienced such difficult times? So two Bible translators and a psychologist and a psychiatrist got together and started developing these materials for pastors to use with their people. It took off like wildfire. The program, it ended up being super impactful, and more people started asking for it. They formalized the lessons in a book in 2004, and it continued to grow through translation into other languages. And ultimately in 2011, SIL asked or created a collaboration with the American Bible Society to manage the program, because there was so much demand for it that SIL members were being distracted from Bible translation that they were committed to do. So we have been working in close partnership with the American Bible Society since the Trauma Healing Institute was formed, in order to promote and support this program around the world. It's currently being used in over 130 languages, countries, and all or part of the materials have been translated into about 200 languages. Come on in.
Started?
Yes, but come on in.
Oh, go ahead. I was just checking to make sure you got started.
Okay. Anyway, so let's talk about trauma a little bit. I'd like to just kind of talk generally about how we envision it and how we approach trauma healing, and then present for you part of one of the lessons of the program. So when we talk about trauma, some people think about events. They call events trauma, right? But what we think about when we think about trauma is the impact of events on people. So traumatic events are things that people experience, excuse me, that affect their entire body, mind, soul, right? And what we are focused on then is trying to help heal those wounds that they have received in their minds and in their hearts. And so our approach is really about, excuse me, emotional and spiritual healing for people who have experienced traumatic events. And it's not always the same event. I mean, the same event might not affect everybody the same way. Some people may have enough resilience that they just keep going and are not affected with trauma. But other people who have been through maybe lots of bad experiences, or who are maybe more sensitive, might have trauma. So if we think about what the scripture says about love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul and strength, right? We connect that with trauma healing. That when somebody has trauma, they struggle to love God with their heart, mind, and soul. Why? Because their hearts tend to kind of close up, right? To protect themselves. And so what we are interested in doing is helping to kind of remove those blockages that people have that inhibit their relationship with the Lord. If we also think about trauma and how it affects people relationally, people tend to withdraw inside themselves when they have trauma. And so this program also is very based on mental health principles that help to reconnect people with their community, first of all, with people in a healing group, and then in other people within their communities as they go forward. So that's kind of the idea. This is the process that we use, which is essentially, we talk about, this is pretty small, I hope you can see it. We didn't realize we were going to have such a big room. Anyway, so we start out especially with Christians, talking about, if God loves us, why do we suffer? right? I think that's one of the biggest questions that people have asked around the globe and through the centuries. And so we want people to understand that God didn't cause this suffering, that God allowed people to make their choices, and that those are the things that end up causing trauma. So we talk about that. Now, if we're working with people who are not Christians, we might not start with talking about what the Bible has to say about suffering, right? But we always get to it because this is a strongly Bible-based program that's really about scripture engagement, about allowing people to connect with the Lord and with other people. So today we're going to start talking about this second lesson, which is the importance of being heard when you have trauma. We really want people to be able to connect with other people in the healing group. So we focus on creating a safe space for people to share whatever they feel comfortable with within the group. And we talk about how to be a good listener, how to listen in a way that helps to promote healing in the person who's sharing their story. We also talk about the grieving process. So what happens when somebody experiences significant loss, not just the death of somebody, but the loss of anything else, their livelihood, their freedom, lots of things that can affect. So what is that process like? And we do it in a simplified way. So I know many of you are engaged with counseling program, right? And you may have heard various models of healing, of the healing from grief. We have a simplified approach. This entire program can be led by lay people. We don't try to take over the role of therapists. We just train people in a very simple way and in a simple process by which they can help heal themselves first and then help other people heal. We then progress to expressing your pain to God. And we use scriptural examples, primarily from Psalms, about laments that the people of God have given. And many people feel like they shouldn't complain to God, right? Or they shouldn't be mad at God, which a lot of times we are when we've been wounded and we don't understand why, right? And so we want people to feel comfortable expressing whatever they've experienced and however it's affected them, expressing that to the Lord. So we talk about lamenting. Then we talk about how people can bring their pain to Jesus for healing. And we have a ceremony that helps people, once they've gone through this initial part of the process, to identify what is the pain that you are carrying and how can we invite the Lord's healing power into that. So I think the whole biblical aspect and the connection to the Lord is something that makes this trauma healing program much more powerful than secular trauma healing programs, because not only is it good mental health principles, but it invites the power of God into people's lives. The next step, after people have experienced some healing from their the wounds that have caused their trauma, we talk about forgiveness. So, and we do that after we go through some of the healing process, because a lot of times people who have been deeply wounded can't even think about forgiving the people that have affected them, that have hurt them. So after we've gone through this part of the process, then we talk about forgiveness, and we move on to talk a bit about rebuilding and resilience, that they need to go forward. So the main focus of the program is through this part, and we have a second set of story or of lessons that focus more on rebuilding and resilience. So that's general information. Do you have any questions right now before I go to the next piece? Yes.
How long would you say this process is? Months, weeks, years?
The core lessons are 6 lessons, each of which take about 2 hours.
Okay.
So it works really well when it's done kind of in a retreat format or in like 3 to 4 days of full time. But we've also, during the pandemic, where everything was shut down, we decided we needed to do something. We couldn't just stop doing trauma healing when people were needing it more than ever. And so we started trying to do it online. And what do you know? God helped it to work. It's of course not as good as when you do it in person, but it is functioning. And so we're able to do training online. We typically do it in sessions of 2 or 3 hours. So the total, the core lessons take 12 to 15 hours total, and they can be arranged however works for the people who want to be trained. Yes?
You're gonna go through all these points. If not, I have two questions. You touched a little bit on the ceremony part, the what and the why.
Uh-huh.
And you talked about forgiveness. If the trauma is not caused by other people, do you just move on?
No, we want to talk about forgiveness anyway, because it's such an aspect of mental health. And so it's one of the core lessons that helps people to kind of make peace with those around them, and also to kind of let go of the bitterness that they might be carrying from what has happened to them, even if it wasn't caused by other people. So sometimes people have been through maybe a natural disaster and they lost their home, right? There may be people during that event that they need to forgive. And another aspect of the forgiveness is talking about how do you forgive yourself, right? Which is a huge impediment for some people. And so we want to address that as well, for people to be able to accept God's forgiveness and learn to forgive themselves.
Yeah, I'm curious about if there is kind of a part of the program at all that involves helping management of symptoms. For example, if someone is going through the program and they start to experience dissociative symptoms or other kind of traumatic symptoms in the process.
You know, we talk a little bit about that. It's essentially about breathing and grounding, or helping to kind of remove somebody from the session where they become overwhelmed and walk alongside them through that to get them back on an even keel. But we don't go into a lot of counseling practices around that.
I have a curious question for you.
Yes.
I don't know if you'll get to it later on, but I would love to see how, at least the model is that you've had an event or some events that you're responding to and that has been traumatic for you. I'm just wondering if the people that have been through this program that are going back to an unsafe place where they will where they will be continually presented with more traumatic events, what that looks like.
Yeah. The reality is God tells us we're all going to suffer, right? We all experience some suffering in our lives, and some of it may be in the past and a lot of it may be in the future. And so during this whole process, we're not only helping people to process the trauma and grief that they may be carrying, but also giving them tools to be able to help themselves in the future and continue to build resilience. All right, so we think of trauma as a part of grief. So if we look at grief as this circle, grief and loss, trauma is something that fits here, where it always involves grief and loss, but not every loss is traumatic, right? So my 99-year-old grandmother or mother-in-law, died a couple years ago. It wasn't a trauma for me because I knew it was coming, right? She's 99 years old. Of course, she's going to die at some point. The different impact of it was, for my sister-in-law, it was trauma because she had a lot of unresolved issues, and somehow she thought if she didn't address them, I don't know what she thought, but she was then traumatized from the loss of her mother, who she had no more opportunity to resolve things with. So the same event can be traumatic for one person and not traumatic for another. Within the trauma circle, though, what we're talking about is events that cause intense fear, a sense of helplessness, and horror. So it might be something that that occurs at one time. Say you're held at gunpoint and robbed on the street. Okay, so that would be a traumatic event. Something that kind of divides your life between before and after. You may never feel that same sense of security that you felt before. But trauma could occur from sexual abuse, from domestic abuse, from war, various types of violence. Lots of different things can cause trauma on an individual. But it can also occur from repeated events that happen over and over and over again and kind of have an incremental effect on us. So trauma, this is what we're mainly trying to focus on in the program, but it also helps people who have various kinds of loss in their lives to understand more what has happened to them and how can they resolve that. So it really, in effect, ends up helping with all sorts of different difficult things that they may experience. So let's talk for a minute about, let's imagine that I have this huge cut on my arm. How would you describe that and what should I do about it?
It's a trauma.
It's a trauma. It's a physical trauma for sure, and it might be an emotional trauma too. Yeah. Okay. What are some of the characteristics of it?
It's painful. It's painful.
It's painful. Absolutely. Bleeding. Yeah.
Vulnerable to infection.
Right. So I need to clean it out. I need to take good care of it. Right. What else?
Needs Band-Aids, needs care, antibiotics.
Absolutely. And what happens if I put a couple of butterflies over it without cleaning it out?
Yeah.
Could get infected, right?
More complications in other areas.
More complications. That's exactly right. So what we want to do to help people understand the emotional effects of trauma is to envision it like a physical wound. If we think about a physical wound, got some of the things you've already mentioned. Have another, yeah, this will work. So these are some of the things you mentioned. You didn't say it's visible, but obviously if it's a cut on my arm, it's gonna be visible, right? So let's talk about how that's too high for you. It is. All right, I'll write the columns. Okay, so a physical wound is visible. What about a heart wound?
That's right.
Itch. Yeah. So we might be able to see the effects of it in people's behavior, right? But it's largely invisible. And I wrote that in the wrong place. Okay. All right. I need a taller assistant, Sherry.
Hang on. It's still come the right size these days.
That's one of the criteria. Right? Okay, so we talked about it being painful and needing to be treated with care. What about heart wounds? Same. If ignored, it's likely to get worse. What do you think? Same. You also mentioned it must be cleaned to remove any foreign objects or dirt. What do you think about a heart wound?
I think it's the same, yeah.
Okay, same. Good. We're talking about different things that need to be removed, but it's still the same thing, right? In the general sense. If it heals on the wound, excuse me, if the wound heals on the surface with infection still inside, it will cause the person to become very sick. Same. Only God brings healing, but often he uses people and medicine to do so. What do you think? Same. If not treated, it often attracts flies. Same. What do you mean the same?
Well, it fester, and so it could attract other things that are not good for you because you haven't attended to that wound.
Bad
Right.
behavior.
So, right, bad company might affect us. We might try to avoid, go ahead.
Oh, addiction.
Addiction, right, to avoid that pain. So that's something that trauma, untreated trauma can lead to. It takes time to heal. Same. A lot of times we want people to just get over it, right? Or we want ourselves to just get over it, but we can't. And then a healed wound may leave a scar. What do you think?
Yes.
Right. So this helps us kind of envision that we need to do some of these things on the heart wounds that we may be carrying. But mostly people don't know what to do, right? We want to help others, we want to help ourselves, but how do we do that? We know to go to a doctor, we know to put Band-Aids on, we know to use disinfectant, right, on a wound. But what do we do about this? So,
we're gonna do an activity that will try to help you. What happens when we try to hold our painful feelings inside instead of letting them out? So I'll bring it down here.
need help with that? You got it.
Myself, it's good work.
Could be a great illustration of getting the pain out if you fall down the steps and spread it everywhere, right? Can everybody see it if it's over there, or do you need it up here?
Bottles here. We're just gonna put bottles in the water, and I'm gonna try and hold them all under the water. Let's see what happened. Okay, a crisis. I was going to work one day and had a flat tire. The spare was out, not working either, so man, it took me a long time and I got late to work. My boss yelled at me. Okay, oh, boss yelled, that's another one. What kind of crisis have you guys had? Oh, had. Throwing something out.
Yeah.
Say again? Yeah, small vehicle.
That'll
Okay.
disrupt your life.
Yes. What else?
Fall down the stairs.
Oh, yes.
It's a really bad day. Yeah.
Okay, I can hold that much. I don't know. What else?
Problems bigger than you expected.
Oh, the kids' problems. Oh, yeah, I got called in by the school counselor. Oh, dear.
Now, Sherry, why aren't you helping with what the church needs you to do?
Oh, yes, I have so much energy.
I mean, it just seems like you're not very committed to the Lord.
Okay, so this takes a bit of energy, takes a bit of effort, right? So far, okay, we gotta have one more before I have to go back to church.
You're audited by the IRS.
Oh, yes. Water. Oh, dear. Oh, my goodness. This doesn't work anymore. My painful memories. Oh, dear. I'll have to come out. Okay, so what is this showing us about keeping in our painful thoughts and emotions? Hard. It's hard. It takes effort. So you can't be at church all the time doing the things you used to do at church. You don't have time for a lot of, schoolwork. How do I have time and mental energy for my schoolwork?
focus.
I can't focus. Time job, all that. It just is really hard. So,
And it's not actually even possible once you get somebody involved in there. It's really not possible for them to stay.
you're right.
Right.
They won't stay in. So just a little activity to show you. Now that I'm all wet.
Here.
Thank you. Okay, now we wanted to talk a little bit about what kind of things when we have a trauma and we're trying to keep all these emotions inside of us, what kind of behaviors do you see people like that? People that are like that, could be yourself, but what kind of behaviors do you see when this happens?
You're short with your family members.
Yes. You're angry, you're upset, you're very short. Yeah,
Sometimes like overly happy or
Yeah.
energetic or like giant personality kind of thing covered.
right, covering it up. Yeah. What else?
Anxious, like anxiety.
Anxious, yeah, all those emotions come out. You never know when they're gonna come out. Okay, so sometimes it's reliving all those emotions and then they come out. Okay, so we have one behavior is reliving. Okay. And that person also might want to tell the world, you might want to tell about what happened 25 times. Or have nightmares about it, or just flashbacks about it. So, yeah, a lot of those things. What about the opposite of that? Somebody that doesn't want to tell, if you want to tell all about it 25 times, you see people that don't want to talk about it at all. Yeah.
Drawing, that's maybe.
Yeah,
Drawing.
withdrawing, yes, withdrawing and avoiding all that. I don't want to deal with it anymore. I had a friend who had a car accident and she said for 10 years, she didn't want to drive. She just wanted to avoid that whole thing. She had to a few times, but she didn't want to. And every time it was a car crash, and every time she heard that sound that sounded like a car crash, she's, I want to go away. I want to hide. Withdrawn. So what else? Are there some other things you've seen? Behaviors. Say it again. Lashing out, yes. Lashing out. Yep. I just want to get angry at the whole world. And that's kind of part of just being on alert all the time. You're just on alert and you're just you have to tell the world what's happening. And might be jumpy. Yeah. Like this gal with the car crash. Every time she heard that noise, well, might not even been a car crash, but she heard that noise. She jumped it. What kind of physical things? There's some physical things too that can go along with this. What do you think?
Like ticks, kind of.
Yeah.
Like always checking the locks and always, did I have?
Yeah. Right.
Blood pressure. Yeah.
What else? There was some more of there.
Having a lot of sadness, maybe for no explain, but don't really know why.
No explanation. Go ahead.
A lot of like digestive issues, like stomach aches, nausea.
Yeah.
Migraines.
Stomach things. Migraines. Good. What else?
People, you just eat.
Sleep. Yes. Either sleeping a lot or not able to sleep at all. Good. Okay, so this is just a short list of things that can happen. People react differently to trauma. So just a few things. So, right. I'm going to pass out some verses and we want to talk about here. I'll save this one. If you have your phones or something,
In the back row.
I'll ask you to read the verse. And we just want to find out what's happening in that verse. And how are those people in that scripture section expressing their feelings? So does somebody have Matthew 26:75?
And Peter remembered what Jesus had told him, before the rooster crows, you will say 3 times that you do not know me. He went out and wept bitterly.
So what was happening there? Yeah. He was so ashamed because he was the one that said, oh, I'll die for you, right? And he denied the Lord. So was he expressing his feelings?
Yeah, wept bitterly.
Yeah, he was. Got it out. So how about Jonah 4:1-3?
Jonah was very unhappy about this and became angry. So he prayed, Lord, didn't I say before I left home that this is just what you would do? That's why I did my best to run away to Spain. I knew that you are a loving and merciful God, always patient, always kind, and always ready to change your mind and not punish. Now then, Lord, let me die. I am better off dead than alive.
Okay. That tells what was happening. So did he express his feelings? He sure did. He's just, okay, God, I knew this was going to happen. Let me die. Okay, what about Psalm 55:4-6? For David, I think it's David. Go ahead.
I am terrified, and the terrors of death crush me. I'm gripped by fear and trembling. I am overcome with horror. I wish I had wings like a dove. I wish I would fly away and find rest.
Okay. So I don't remember exactly what was going on in David's life, but obviously, who is he expressing that to?
To God.
Yeah. Yeah, so we can express to God or whoever else we need to, but he expressed it, didn't he? And then Matthew 26:37-38. Oh, you do? Okay, Sam, go ahead.
He took with him Peter and two sons of Zebedee. Grief and anguish came over him, and he said to them, "The sorrow in my heart is so great that it almost crushes me. Stay here and keep watch with me."
So who was saying that?
Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus. Okay, so he expressed his feelings too. So I think it's okay that we express our feelings, right? He wants us to do that. And then Paul says it again in many of his letters too, how we need to share each other's burdens. And to do that, we need to share with each other. Okay, thank you. So we still have time left. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, first I'll ask if you have any more questions. We'll go through questions first. Any more?
So part of what we do actually in each of the lessons is we ask people to talk about what they may have learned in their culture, in their church culture, in their home culture, in their community that has given them certain perspectives. And then we compare that then with what scripture has to say about things. And so we're really trying to help people not criticize their culture. Some of the things that we learn from culture are really good. So it's not that we're trying to say you shouldn't have these, you shouldn't believe any of the things your culture tells you, but just that we need to examine those things in the light of scripture. So that's a part of every lesson is kind of saying, okay, what is your culture taught you about this? Now let's look at the Bible and let's compare. And then we have application of some of the exercises. Yeah.
Yes, bringing it to culture, I do have a question regarding the application piece, I guess. Partly culture related, partly personality related, because I have witnessed where because of culture, there's an immediate refusal to want to participate in identifying trauma and doing the work. But then once the connection has been made, that no, actually, it's good to talk about these things and to work on it. There's that way of addressing it, which then now scripture is a good answer for me to have in terms of how to address that. But on the flip hand, bringing it now to personality, what would you say is important in regards to application? Because two people might both experience the same exact trauma and may come from the exact same culture, where here in America, we do have these conversations, but because of personality, maybe one way to address the trauma is different. How to address that same than another, so I'm wondering what.
Right, yeah, so
how do we decide what the route is?
it's really important to try to understand the culture that you're speaking into, right? And so, and our ultimate goal is really to have people within that community, within that culture, be able to lead healing groups. However, we have to come in from outside and train them at the beginning, right? And our mission with the trauma healing team of SIL is really to develop self-sustaining programs around the world. So that involves actually 3 to 5 years of work in an area where we're first leading healing groups, then we lead training sessions, and then we, as people start leading healing groups in their own communities, then we follow up with more training, and ultimately we train other trainers who are from that community who can continue to take the program forward. So we're very interested. SIL works around the world in many different cultures, and so we're very focused on how's it going to play out in that culture, even to, for example, the phrasing of the questions. So in an Asian culture, maybe you would never say, "Tell me about how you feel about this," right? Or "Who wants to volunteer for something?" That doesn't work in an Asian healing group because they are not supposed to stand out, right? And so we have to adapt. Kind of how do we phrase the question? How do we frame things so that it works in that culture?
Yeah, I was wondering, between like the topic, like the process that you guys have, and the signs, the reactions to trauma. Something that I have gone through and I have learned through my own trauma, through to my own hurt as an MK and PK, and seeing others, and there's the cultural bias, every culture has, American culture too, right?
Yeah.
And all of these, sometimes I have noticed that the process of idolatry building could be important. I don't know if this is something that as counselors and facilitators, we go through at some point, or is it just like overall the whole process? I don't know if I'm making my question clear. Is idolatry a topic to engage with a counselee, or just along the process?
No, we don't specifically address idolatry. I mean, that's just not part of how we frame things. So it may address kind of tangentially, what are things that are driving people or that they are in effect worshiping, but we don't get into that whole religious perspective on idolatry. For one thing, our main intent is to do no harm. We don't want to layer any harm on top of what people have already experienced. And so we try to be really careful about how we frame things, not telling people they're wrong, those sorts of things, but providing them an opportunity to think and to apply for themselves. So the program is really participatory. We try not to talk more than 5 minutes at a time in a healing group. We present some information, and then we try to get people to think about it, to give their opinions, their perspectives, and then to start sharing about their personal stories.
So we do pairs or small groups, even in the larger group. Yeah. Just really good to get to a small group about that. Yeah. Go ahead.
So now I'm curious. Based on your response to that last question, where does the scriptural based approach come into play based on what you said earlier? I'm curious how that connection is made.
Can you add just a little bit more about what you?
Sure. So I remember, I don't know if it's prompted by another question or if you were just kind of giving us a good forecast of remembering that from what you said, a lot of what the counseling strategies you use are scripture based. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know how that is in connection still though to your answer to my friend here, his question, based on, yes, wanting to make sure you don't come out and tell someone they're wrong or right, but, for example, idolatry, that being a scriptural based concept, how would you address that being a scriptural based organization?
Because people come from lots of different faith backgrounds, even Christians, right? We don't want to get into theological debate. So we want to look at specific scriptures and invite people to have a conversation about it, right? And so if somebody in the healing group says something that we think is way off base, we don't say you're wrong. We say, interesting. What do the rest of y'all think? Right? And try to help the group self-correct.
I have a question about like practical. So I know y'all mentioned earlier that you also do like local based, and that your ministry is aimed to help lay people institute this. So what would it look like on a practical level if someone comes and gets the training and says, hey, I'm really interested in like implementing this type of healing in my community? What's like some practical ways that that's done?
Okay, so you mean getting into a healing group?
No, like if someone has, say, been through this already and done training and wants to help implement it at their community.
Okay.
Like train like.
Well, most Christians are part of a church. You could do it through your church. I do it through my church. We have 3 healing groups a year. And then if they want training to do it, we, show them where the training would be or when and all that. So that if they want to do healing groups on their own, they can. Often it's through a church. A friend of mine goes to Tyler Street Church. So like tomorrow night, I'm going to be doing one at their church for a couple of hours, Wednesday night. So I started through the church that I attend and then have gone to others now.
Okay.
So that's one way.
Yeah. Would you say like it's definitely the majority, like location for it is in local churches? Or have you seen it in different?
Let's see. Well, we've done some online, Marilyn mentioned online, so you get a whole bunch of range of culture and people on that one. But yeah, a lot of churches. What else have I done? I guess I've done a neighborhood one too. Those that I knew in the neighborhood that were Christians. Again, it's mostly aimed toward Christians. We do have some now that are more toward other religions, can be used for other religions, but
Lots
yeah.
of organizations besides churches are involved in trauma healing. So the Trauma Healing Alliance is a partnership between a dozen different organizations that are committed to using this program around the world, which helps us to collaborate and helps us to maintain the quality standards because we all agree to the same kind of training process and to establishing those healing groups in the same way. So there's like SIM, SIM is involved in it, World Renew, World Impact, African Leadership. So a number of different organizations besides SIL and the American Bible Society.
Yeah.
Maybe just getting too detailed or too nitty gritty, and maybe it's addressed in your training, but when you go to churches for this or implement it, your own church for this regular trauma healing, how do you mediate when it's conflict within members of the body or towards a pastor or an elder? Like, because you talked about even going in small groups or pairing, is that essentially how you kind of,
I haven't had a lot of struggle with that, I guess.
When we're working within churches,
Yeah,
we typically like to connect with the leadership first
yeah.
and give permission. So we do something called convening sessions or information sessions where we bring either like all the leadership of one church or one organization, or we might invite people from a variety of different churches in an area, and we communicate to them. We spend a couple of hours talking about what the program is, how it works, letting them experience part of the lesson or of a lesson in order to kind of see what it is and whether or not they want to invite that into their particular organization. So that's part of what we're doing, is really trying to help the leadership get on board with it. And a lot of times without that, they're a little suspect, right? You're going to come in and start doing this thing that seems like counseling with my people. Need to know more. So
Yeah, we have our own counselors like that. Yeah, leadership, exactly. That's what I would say. The ones I've done it, and we do something with the leaders first. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask a question I think you just answered. Do you often have it where churches, you come in for that session, they're like, we don't want you stirring everything up. Is that common?
well, they're hesitant,
Yeah.
right? They don't know what they're going to be exposing their members to, and they want to be protective, and we like to support that.
Yeah.
We don't want just any program coming in there, right? And so one part of what helps people have confidence in it is knowing that it has been used effectively around the world, 131 countries, all these large organizations that are providing the program. That sort of thing helps to provide kind of that initial willingness to even listen, and then presenting kind of what the program is about and helping them understand we're not here to change their theology. We're here to invite them to experience the scripture, right, with what they already know.
And so do you recommend like a continual support after you finish the program, like setting prayer teams to be set up or additional support for people who
We'd
discovered?
love for that to happen if we're coming in from the outside to do a training, and then a lot of times we're doing mentoring remotely, right? So we encourage churches and other organizations to continue to support those people, but we can't move everywhere where we want this to grow, right? So
Recommendation, is that
yes.
a specific type of recommendation?
Absolutely. When we train people in trauma healing, we encourage them to build in some kind of follow-up if they can. Whether the people who invited us in might have an ongoing connection. And we want people within the healing groups also to connect with one another so that they have people who understand some of the same things they do and who know how to listen well and help each other process.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so good when you do pair people up or do a small group, because they get to know each other too. If they're like in a church. I think I saw another hand. Oh, yeah.
I was just curious, when you're talking about like different cultures and wanting to have people from that culture being trained and becoming leader, like how do you like say, like if I were to bring my daughter to a trauma healing group, her culture, even though we're from sort of the same culture, hers would be different than mine. Like do y'all have by an age group? Do y'all, I mean, like how do y'all?
We do have it for children, like I've done it with 6 to 12-year-olds, and they have a team program, 13 to 19, I guess. And then adults on up. I guess you could have some teens in with your adults, but basically adults.
Do y'all have teenagers that do the training or like young adults?
We like for young adults to take the training to work with teens.
Yes.
Right? But typically what we like is for people who have already been working with children or with teens to learn to take the program. We don't want to have to train them how to work with teens, right? Or how to work with children. It's just, we're not willing to take quite that much on.
Yeah, right.
How does the program decide whether or not someone's equipped to be like to train or institute something?
Ah, good. Yeah, well, we have initial training, and then they need to do 2 healing groups somewhere, whether it's in their church or neighborhood or whatever. And we like them to train in 2s. You want someone else there with you, and sometimes another mentor if you want. Feel like I'm not really good at this. Can you help me? And so I mentor, so I've mentored some too. But yeah, after a couple of leading some healing groups, and we have called it advanced. And then you can bring your questions. I mean, before that, you can bring questions too, but then you really get solid into how to do the program. And I think that really helps.
As far as training people to train other people, we invite people who really stand out from the advanced equipping to come and help with the training. So each training involves going through the core lessons, going through a healing group for the people that are wanting to be trained, and then providing lessons on facilitation. So we might invite somebody who's led a number of healing groups to come and help with that portion, and then walk alongside us as we do the training. We never want to certify anybody as a trainer unless we've actually worked with them, just to be sure that they kind of get it. And the participatory model that we use is really different from what a lot of people have experienced in school or in church. And so it does take a good bit of practice to get people to where they understand that it's the engagement that really promotes healing, right? The connection with other people and people engaging with the process. Hearing about it doesn't heal your trauma, right?
Yeah, so that's good, Marilyn, because I remember when we were doing training for people that took the children's training, one guy was really, he was a pastor, so he was doing all the talking. I'm going, oh, okay, I think I have to take him aside and explain, that's not what we do. You know, this program is you do like 5 minutes of talking. And I like to tell them to wait 10 seconds, count to 10. If you ask a question, kids or the adults, whatever, just wait 10 seconds. They have to think this through. Those are hard questions. So go ahead.
What kind of trauma do you see when you're doing the church healing groups? What kind of things? Domestic violence?
Yeah, I mean, I've had from one gal lost her only son. He committed suicide. I mean,
Oh, yes.
she was just distraught and things like that. And then, you know, families aren't perfect. So another gal had said, okay, I got this trauma, but then we go to visit my in-laws on every weekend, and my mother-in-law cuts me down all the time. So I've got this trauma that happens every week. So all kinds of things like that just, you know, we don't want to see in the church, but it happens.
Another of the lessons that is really impactful, I think more on Christians than non-Christians, is about moral injury. So moral injury, I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but it has to do with when we do something that goes against our core beliefs about what's good and right. And probably all of us as Christians have done something at some point that we knew wasn't right. And so we talk through in the lesson, we talk about what is moral injury and how can moral injury be healed. And we have found that to be just a huge benefit to Christians who recriminate and regret, you know, certain things that we've done in our lives.
Yeah, because like this mom that her son killed himself, she was mad at herself. What did I do? You know, she was
Yeah. We also have additional lessons to help people help themselves and others with specific things. So we have a lesson on suicide. We have a lesson on domestic abuse. We have one on addictions. One on actually on HIV and AIDS. There's a lesson about abortion and healing from the emotional wounds of that and spiritual wounds of that, right? So a number of different lessons. During the pandemic, we also developed a lesson about dealing with the trauma of COVID and how that affected.
Sorry, back to the logistics of someone becoming a trainer. Is there background checks and things like that done for people wanting to be trained?
We do so much work internationally and no.
Sorry. Do that.
But we do like for organizations that invite us to confirm the people that we're going to be working with, right? To decide who is it within our organization and to know those people. Yeah. So we have had, I did a training along the border of Colombia, Venezuela a few years ago, and it turned out that there were two couples that came who were not married, but were living together. Right. And so it's like, okay, well, we went ahead and went through the training. And then at the end of the training, one of the couples got married. Yeah. So anyway, so we try to influence people that way.
Yeah. There was a question in the back there, and then we'll get back to you.
You may have already said this, but are you having a training session in the area in the near future?
Why, yes, I'm so glad you asked that question. So there is going to be a training here at DTS near the end of March. We didn't
End of
bring
May.
that list. End of May, excuse me. After classes are over, there will be a training here at DTS. And we have a list over at our table in the student center, whatever that's called.
Yeah.
Sorry. Where you can sign up to get notification of that. We also have, if you're not involved in classes, we have a training April 30th to May 4th at the International Linguistics Center, which is on the south side of Dallas. So that'll be 5 days, 5 full days of training in which to learn the trauma healing program. So I mentioned the additional lessons. Typically in the initial training, we do the core lessons, and then we might do 1 or 2 other lessons, maybe how to help children or how to care for yourself as a caregiver, right? So a couple of those, but we don't cover all the additional lessons until people have had the opportunity to lead others through a healing group and kind of solidify their understanding of the program.
And if any of you know Jerry Lewis, she's the one that will be doing the training with another trauma healing facilitator in May, end of May. So she said I should get in contact with her. She's doing this stuff with the kids. So yeah, Jerry Lawrence. Oh, I'm sorry, I said Lewiston. Jerry Lawrence. Thank you, Becca. Keep me on track here. Oh, yes.
You were interested in doing trauma healing group with a group where there may be a language barrier. Have you seen this done with translation, or could you comment on that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So it's done in a lot of places around the world. It's done with translation. We like to lead it in people's heart language if we can. A lot of times it ends up being led in the common language of the area, and then materials can be translated into other languages. So I'm really involved with the story-based program, which is really designed for refugees and people who are used to communicating orally, but maybe not real good at reading and writing. And it is based on telling modern day stories that they can identify with, and then having specifically designed questions to draw out what we want them to learn. And then each lesson has a modern day story and a Bible story and a memory verse and an activity around the theme of the lesson. So yeah, we love to have the materials in the heart language of people. And sometimes we'll go into an area, maybe we have the materials in that language, but we don't speak that language, right? So we might do the training in the language of wider communication, but give them materials in their own language.
You mentioned that you have this online. Would you mind sharing the website?
Yes, write to traumahealing@sil.org to find out about the trainings that we have going. We also have, I do lots of training in Spanish. So if you know people who speak Spanish who are interested in this program,
Or did you want to know about the website? You want the website?
Well,
Or the-
I guess if you, I didn't know if they were different. If there are two sites, that'd be great if you can go to us.
So our website is sil.org. And then if you look under what we do, there's a trauma healing thing you can click on, or I have a QR code here that I didn't get large enough to be able to show everyone. But you have it if you want to come scan it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can get connected that way, or you can write to us at traumahealing@sil.org and ask about that sort of thing. So
That's fine. Do you know the format for the training here at the end of May? Is it like a whole day? Is it?
I think it's a whole day for 5 days, but I didn't ask her for sure, but that's what she's done before.
But it usually is.
Yeah, 5 days.
It's usually the week after graduation. That whole week.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess if you know Jerry. Write to her. She's the one. that-
I do work overseas, mostly tribal areas, and been curious about what to do, how to address trauma within that context. And what I'm hearing from you is that if I or anyone were trained, then they could go out and train other leaders within these communities who could then run their own healing groups. Is that correct?
yes, but if you wouldn't, after that 1 week training, you wouldn't be ready to train other people.
Right.
You would be ready to do some practice healing groups and get further training. Yeah.
And then that's the 2 healing groups, and then
That's
Then
advanced
it's
training.
advanced training, right?
okay, I'm just curious how you work through just male only, female only, or mixed groups in tribal environments. How you kind of work through those.
It's totally contextual.
Yeah.
Right? So it's really important to understand the culture and to bring people together who will feel comfortable talking with one another openly. Right? And it really depends on the culture. For example, in Nicaragua, when there was a huge upheaval, there was a lot of distrust because the government was wanting everybody to turn each other in for whatever, right? And so what we ended up doing there is we didn't even have small groups. We'd present the lessons and have people paired with one other person for the whole time, right? To do the sharing so that they could feel safe. So having people feel safe together is really important. And when we have, for example, relatives come to a healing group, I did a group where a woman and her grown daughter were there. And the mom is saying, oh, she could say anything in front of me. And I'm like, okay, well, let's put you in different groups anyway.
Yeah.
Because you already know each other's stories. And the daughter's like, oh, thank you. So we really try to adapt both the approach. In some areas, we do strictly male groups and female groups, right?
Yeah.
So.
Here in the States, I have done a mixed group with men and women together. And then we did one group with just men and I did the women. So, but like we were 20 years in Indonesia and I didn't know about trauma healing, but you would never try and mix people there. You would just do women and men.
Our time is up and we don't want you to miss lunch, but we're
Yeah.
happy to stay here and talk with you if you like.
Thank you so much for coming and keep asking questions.